People often believe that the way to become unforgettable is to be constantly present. They answer every message immediately. They say yes to every invitation. They make themselves available at every opportunity, believing that the more people see them, the more they will be valued. It sounds logical. After all, if you're always there, surely people will appreciate you. But human psychology rarely rewards what is endlessly available. Instead, it quietly adapts to it. What was once appreciated becomes expected. What was once exciting becomes ordinary. And eventually, what was once noticed becomes invisible. This is one of the oldest paradoxes in human nature. We don't always value what is abundant, we value what feels rare, not because rarity automatically creates quality, but because scarcity captures attention. The mind is wired to notice contrast. When something is always present, it fades into the background of our awareness. Like the ticking of a clock in a quiet room, you hear it at first, then your brain filters it out. The sound hasn't disappeared. Your attention has. The same mechanism often shapes relationships, friendships, workplaces, and social dynamics. Think about the people who command the most respect in any environment. They are rarely the loudest person in the room. They are rarely the individual who is constantly seeking validation or reminding everyone of their existence. Instead, they possess something far more powerful. They understand restraint. They know that value grows when it isn't endlessly displayed. They speak when their words matter. They appear when their presence serves a purpose. And because they are intentional rather than constant, people naturally pay attention when they arrive. This isn't about manipulation, it is about understanding the psychology of attention. Attention follows contrast. When there is no contrast, the mind stops noticing. If someone is always texting first, always apologizing, always explaining themselves, always asking for approval, their behavior becomes predictable. Predictability creates comfort, but it rarely creates admiration. Human beings are curious by nature. We lean toward mystery, we remember what interrupts patterns, we notice what isn't guaranteed. Consider history for a moment. The most influential leaders, thinkers, and strategists understood that presence alone wasn't enough. They recognized that timing was everything. They knew when to step forward and when to step back. They allowed silence to create anticipation. They allowed absence to reveal importance. Their influence wasn't measured by how often they appeared, but by the impact they created when they did. Now ask yourself an uncomfortable question. If you disappeared from the routines of your social circle for a week, what would happen? Would people genuinely wonder where you are, or would they simply continue because your presence had become so expected that they never consciously noticed it? The answer isn't meant to create insecurity, it is meant to reveal a truth. Familiarity often hides value. Many people unknowingly give away their emotional power because they fear being forgotten. That fear drives them to overextend themselves. They constantly check in, they constantly prove their loyalty, they constantly remind others of their worth. Ironically, this behavior often produces the opposite effect. When people no longer have the opportunity to miss you, they also lose the opportunity to appreciate you. Psychologists often describe a principle known as hedonic adaptation. It explains why people quickly become accustomed to positive experiences. A new opportunity excites us. A promotion feels extraordinary. A beautiful home feels luxurious. But over time, these experiences become normal. The excitement fades, not because they have lost value, but because the mind adjusts to them. Relationships are not immune to this process. Your kindness, your availability, your generosity, these are admirable qualities. Yet, if they are offered without boundaries or intention, others may begin to see them as automatic rather than meaningful. This is why boundaries are not acts of selfishness. They are acts of self-respect. A boundary communicates that your time has value, your attention has value, and your energy has value. It reminds both you and everyone around you that your presence is something to be appreciated, not assumed. Notice the difference between confidence and approval seeking. The approval seeker cannot tolerate silence. Every unanswered message becomes a source of anxiety. Every delayed response feels like rejection. Every disagreement becomes a crisis to fix immediately. Confidence operates differently. It understands that not every silence requires a response. Not every misunderstanding requires an explanation. Not every absence is a loss. Sometimes stepping back is the strongest statement you can make. There is also a deeper philosophical lesson hidden beneath this idea. Your worth should never depend on how frequently others acknowledge you. If your identity relies entirely on constant attention, you become a prisoner of other people's reactions. Every compliment becomes necessary, every invitation becomes validation, every interaction becomes a measurement of your value. That is not freedom, it is dependency disguised as connection. Real strength emerges when you no longer chase recognition because you are busy building substance. The individual focused on growth does not have time to constantly advertise themselves. They are learning, creating, improving, and evolving. Ironically, this quiet dedication often attracts more attention than relentless self-promotion ever could. People become curious, they notice the change, they wonder what has shifted. The absence of unnecessary noise allows genuine achievement to speak louder. Imagine two people entering the same room. One immediately begins talking, seeking attention from everyone around them. The other listens first. They observe, they contribute thoughtfully rather than constantly. Hours later, people often remember the second person more clearly. Why? Because intentional presence creates greater impact than constant visibility. The goal is not to disappear as a tactic or to withdraw in bitterness. It is to stop confusing availability with value. Continue caring for people. Continue showing kindness. Continue being dependable, but do so from a place of choice, not fear. Let your presence be deliberate rather than automatic. Allow your time to reflect your priorities. Protect your energy so that when you give it, it carries genuine meaning. As you begin to live this way, something remarkable happens. You stop worrying about whether people notice you because you become fully engaged in becoming someone worth noticing. Your confidence no longer depends on immediate responses or constant reassurance. Instead, it comes from knowing that your value exists independently of anyone's temporary attention. And when you finally understand this principle, you'll realize that the most powerful people are not those who desperately try to stay in everyone's sight. They are the ones whose quiet absence reminds others of the value they took for granted. If you truly want to understand influence, you must first understand that the human mind is uncomfortable with unanswered questions. We are creatures who crave certainty. We want to know what people think of us, why they acted the way they did, and what comes next. Whenever certainty disappears, the imagination rushes in to fill the empty space. And more often than not, imagination creates a story far more powerful than reality ever could. This is why silence has always been one of the least understood forms of strength. Most people fear silence because they mistake it for weakness. They assume that if they don't defend themselves immediately, explain every decision, or respond to every criticism, they will lose control of the narrative. But psychology tells us something different. The person who reacts to everything gives everyone else control over their emotions. The person who chooses when to speak controls something far more valuable, their presence. Think about how predictable most conversations have become. Someone criticizes you, and you're expected to defend yourself. Someone ignores your message, and you're expected to chase them. Someone misunderstands your intentions, and you're expected to explain yourself repeatedly until they approve. Society has conditioned us to believe that every silence must be filled, but every unnecessary explanation weakens your position. When you constantly justify your actions, you quietly communicate uncertainty. You suggest that your decisions require someone else's permission to become valid. Confidence operates differently. Confidence understands that not every opinion deserves a response, and not every misunderstanding deserves correction. This isn't arrogance, it is emotional discipline. There is an old psychological principle known as the information gap. Whenever people sense that they don't possess the complete picture, their curiosity intensifies. The mind naturally searches for missing pieces because unfinished stories demand attention. This is why cliffhangers keep audiences watching. This is why unanswered questions stay in our thoughts for days. And this is why silence often becomes more memorable than endless conversation. Imagine two individuals leaving the same workplace. The first announces every future plan. They explain why they're leaving, what they'll be doing next, where they'll live, and why everyone should understand their decision. By the end of the conversation, there is nothing left to wonder about. The second simply thanks everyone for the opportunity, leaves with dignity, and quietly begins building a new chapter. Weeks later, people are still asking, "I wonder what they're doing now." The difference isn't mystery for the sake of manipulation. The difference is that one person allowed curiosity to exist. Human beings often value what they must mentally pursue. When everything is handed to them, attention fades, but when there is space for imagination, attention expands. This principle applies far beyond conversation. Have you ever noticed how certain people become more respected after they stop trying so hard to be understood? When they were constantly explaining themselves, very few people listened. But once they stopped seeking approval, people suddenly became interested in their perspective. Why? Because confidence is contagious. When someone appears completely at peace without external validation, others begin wondering what gives them that certainty. They become curious about the source of that inner stability. Silence creates psychological gravity. It draws attention instead of chasing it. Unfortunately, many people sabotage this process because they cannot tolerate discomfort. The moment someone distances themselves emotionally, they send another message, then another, then another. Every unanswered notification becomes an invitation to surrender more emotional control. They don't realize that their fear of losing connection is actually accelerating it. The strongest relationships are not built on constant reassurance. They are built on mutual respect, independence, and trust. People need room to think. They need room to miss you. They need room to recognize your contribution without being constantly reminded of it. Silence provides that room. There is another lesson hidden beneath this principle. Silence is not only about what you don't say. It is about what you refuse to give away, your emotions, your insecurities, your immediate reactions. Most conflicts escalate because people react faster than they think. An insult arrives, and anger immediately responds. Criticism appears, and defensiveness immediately follows. A rumor spreads, and panic takes control. Emotion becomes predictable. Predictability becomes vulnerability. The person who pauses before responding interrupts that pattern. That pause changes everything. It creates space between stimulus and response. Within that space lies wisdom. The Stoic philosophers understood this centuries ago. They believed that external events do not control us. Our interpretations of those events do. Modern psychology continues to support this idea. Emotional regulation consistently predicts stronger relationships, better leadership, and more effective decision making. The ability to remain calm while others become emotional is not a personality trait, it is a discipline. And discipline always appears powerful. Consider the greatest negotiators, leaders, and strategists throughout history. They rarely rushed to answer every accusation. They understood that people often reveal more when confronted with silence than when interrupted with argument. Silence invites disclosure. People become uncomfortable. They begin talking more. They explain themselves. They reveal motivations they never intended to expose. Meanwhile, the disciplined observer gathers information without surrendering emotional control. This is not manipulation, it is patience, and patience has become rare in a world addicted to immediate reactions. Today, social media rewards instant opinions, messages demand instant replies, news cycles demand instant judgment. Everyone is speaking, very few are thinking. This is precisely why thoughtful silence has become so valuable. It separates the reactive from the intentional. It transforms conversation from emotional impulse into strategic communication. But there is an important warning. Silence should never become passive aggression. It should never be used to punish, manipulate, or emotionally control another person. That is insecurity wearing the mask of confidence. True silence comes from peace, not pride. It comes from knowing that your worth is not determined by winning every argument or correcting every misconception. Sometimes people will misunderstand you. Sometimes they will judge you unfairly. Sometimes they will create stories that have nothing to do with reality. Accept this. No explanation can force understanding upon someone who has already chosen a conclusion. Instead of exhausting yourself trying to control every opinion, invest your energy where it produces real results. Grow your character, strengthen your discipline, improve your skills, let your actions become your loudest argument. Because over time, actions possess a credibility that words can never imitate. Eventually, people stop listening to what you say and begin paying attention to who you have become. That transformation cannot be manufactured through endless conversation. It is earned through quiet consistency. As you practice this principle, you'll notice something remarkable. You become less anxious about being misunderstood, less desperate to defend yourself, less dependent on immediate validation. You discover that confidence is not speaking the loudest voice in the room. Confidence is remaining completely secure, even when silence is your only response. And that quiet certainty creates something words alone never can. It creates intrigue. People begin asking questions you never had to encourage. They begin noticing an absence you never had to announce. Because the greatest influence does not come from explaining yourself until everyone agrees. It comes from becoming so grounded in your purpose that your silence speaks with greater authority than your words ever could. Now we've reached the most important part of this conversation. Understanding the power of absence means very little if your absence has nothing meaningful behind it. Anyone can disappear. Anyone can stop replying to messages, withdraw from social circles, or walk away from a relationship. But if nothing has changed within you, your absence becomes forgettable rather than influential. The goal has never been to vanish. The goal is to become someone whose presence genuinely adds value. So much value that when you're no longer there, people naturally feel the difference. This is where many people misunderstand the idea of becoming unforgettable. They assume that influence comes from creating mystery alone. They believe that if they become distant enough, silent enough, or unavailable enough, others will automatically chase them. But mystery without substance eventually fades. Silence without character becomes emptiness. Distance without purpose becomes irrelevance. Human psychology may be attracted to curiosity, but curiosity only lasts if there is something meaningful waiting on the other side. Think about the people whose absence truly changed your life. Perhaps it was a teacher who believed in your potential, a mentor who challenged your thinking, a friend who brought calm into moments of chaos, or a family member whose quiet strength held everyone together. Their absence wasn't painful simply because they were gone. It was painful because they had brought something unique into your world. They had become a source of wisdom, stability, encouragement, or inspiration. Their value wasn't created by disappearing. It was revealed by their absence. This is the standard you should strive for. Instead of asking, "How can I make people miss me?" ask a far more powerful question. What kind of person do I need to become so that my presence leaves every place better than I found it? That single question changes everything. It shifts your attention away from controlling other people's emotions and directs it toward mastering your own character. Real influence begins with internal transformation. Every hour you spend developing your skills increases your value. Every difficult conversation you handle with emotional maturity strengthens your reputation. Every promise you keep builds trust. Every temptation you resist strengthens your discipline. Every setback you overcome quietly builds resilience. These victories are often invisible in the moment, but together they create a person whose presence carries weight. People often think confidence comes from compliments. It doesn't. Confidence comes from evidence. When you know you've honored your commitments, developed your abilities, and remained true to your values despite adversity, your confidence no longer depends on applause. It becomes self-sustaining, and people notice that. Human beings are remarkably sensitive to authenticity. We can often sense when someone is trying too hard to appear important. We can also sense when someone no longer needs to prove anything. The second person commands respect without demanding it. Why? Because quiet competence speaks louder than loud insecurity. There is a profound difference between seeking attention and earning attention. Attention can be captured with noise. Respect is earned through consistency. Anyone can impress people for a day. Very few can inspire trust over years. That is why discipline matters more than image. Image changes with circumstances, character remains. Imagine entering every room with one simple objective, not to be admired, but to contribute something valuable. Perhaps it is clarity, perhaps it is calm, perhaps it is wisdom, perhaps it is reliability. When people consistently associate your presence with something positive, your absence naturally creates contrast. They begin to notice what is missing, not because you demanded appreciation, but because your value had become undeniable. This principle extends into every area of life. In leadership, the best leaders create environments where others grow. When they leave, their absence is deeply felt because they elevated everyone around them. In friendships, the most valued individuals listen more than they speak, encourage more than they criticize, and remain dependable when circumstances become difficult. When they are absent, people recognize the emotional stability they once provided. Even in professional environments, employees who consistently solve problems rather than create them become irreplaceable. Not because they are loud, because they are useful. Utility creates value, character sustains it. There is also another truth many people resist. Becoming valuable requires accepting temporary loneliness. Growth often separates you from familiar patterns. When you begin protecting your time, some people will call you distant. When you stop participating in meaningless drama, others may accuse you of changing. When you choose discipline over distraction, certain relationships may quietly fade away. Do not fear this. Transformation always changes your environment before it changes your reputation. Many people abandon their growth because they mistake temporary isolation for permanent rejection. But every meaningful achievement requires seasons of invisible work. The musician practices long before applause. The athlete trains long before victory. The author writes long before publication. Likewise, the strongest version of yourself is built long before the world notices. This is why patience becomes one of your greatest allies. Do not rush to prove your value, live it. Do not announce your discipline, practice it. Do not demand respect, become worthy of it. Eventually, reality becomes impossible to ignore. And here's another lesson that separates emotionally mature individuals from everyone else. Never become valuable only for external recognition. If your entire purpose is making other people regret losing you, then they still control your life. Your growth remains dependent on their attention. That is another form of emotional dependence. True freedom arrives when your personal development becomes its own reward. You read because knowledge transforms you. You train because strength improves your character. You work because excellence becomes your identity. Whether people notice immediately becomes irrelevant. Ironically, this is often the moment they begin noticing, because there is something magnetic about individuals who pursue excellence without constantly seeking applause. Their confidence feels different, their conversations become richer, their decisions become calmer, their presence becomes reassuring. And when life eventually separates them from certain people or places, their absence becomes unforgettable, not because they manipulated emotions, but because they consistently brought value wherever they went. So as you leave this conversation, remember the journey we've taken together. First, you discovered that constant availability slowly erodes perceived value, because familiarity often hides appreciation. Then you learned that silence creates space for curiosity, emotional discipline, and genuine respect to emerge. But neither lesson matters unless it leads here. Your greatest power is not disappearing. Your greatest power is becoming. Become so disciplined that your habits inspire confidence. Become so knowledgeable that your words carry wisdom. Become so emotionally grounded that your calm steadies others during chaos. Become so dependable that people trust your presence without question. Become so authentic that you never need to perform for acceptance. Because when your life is built on substance instead of appearances, you never have to convince anyone of your worth. Your actions will speak long after your words are forgotten. Your character will remain long after first impressions have faded. And your absence will remind people not of what they lost temporarily, but of the rare kind of person they were fortunate enough to know.